This audiobook reveals the forgotten law by which a single night can reprogram your subconscious mind completely. As you listen, you'll uncover the truth. Your mind can be rewritten tonight while the world sleeps and the deeper self listens. The moment to reprogram your mind is now. Introduction. There is a hidden truth that has been kept, quietly and carefully, from most who have ever longed for change in their own lives, that the subconscious mind, left untouched and unexamined for a lifetime, can be reprogrammed not across years of struggle, but within the space of a single receptive night. You have been told, again and again, by well-meaning voices who themselves were never shown otherwise, that transformation requires long seasons of effort, that old patterns can only be worn away slowly, through relentless toil against oneself, through years of gritted teeth and disciplined striving. This has never been the whole truth. It is, in fact, a quiet deception, inherited and repeated so often across so many generations that it has come to feel like simple, unquestionable fact. The way an old family story is repeated so often that no one thinks to ask any longer whether it was ever true. The deeper mind does not measure change in years, though you have been taught your whole life to believe otherwise. It measures its acceptance of new instruction not in the accumulation of seasons, but in depth, in the sincerity and stillness with which a single impression is offered to it in the hours surrounding sleep, when its usual defenses have quietly loosened their grip. One night, approached rightly, with full attention and full sincerity, can accomplish what years of scattered, half-hearted and distracted effort never could. For the deeper mind cares nothing for the calendar, and everything for the quality of feeling offered to it in any given moment. Consider for a moment how much of your own life has been shaped not by decisions you consciously made in the clear light of day, but by patterns installed long ago, in childhood, in careless moments, in offhand remarks you barely remember hearing, and yet which continue, even now, to quietly govern how you speak to yourself, what you believe you deserve, what you assume is possible, and what you have long since assumed impossible. These patterns were rarely chosen. They were simply absorbed, the way a sponge absorbs whatever liquid surrounds it, without judgment and without consent. And because they were installed without your conscious agreement, you have perhaps assumed they cannot be removed with your conscious agreement either, that only the same slow, unthinking process that installed them could ever hope to alter them. This is the deception at the heart of nearly every failed attempt at change you have ever made. You have tried to argue with your deeper mind using the language of logic, of willpower, of daytime reasoning, and found, again and again, that the deeper mind simply does not speak that language, and so it did not listen, no matter how firmly you insisted or how many times you resolved, in the bright and confident hours of morning, to be different by evening. What follows is a rediscovery of an older and gentler law, echoing the quiet wisdom of those who came before and understood the deeper mind's true language, though their names have long since faded from common memory, scattered across old letters and half-remembered sayings, waiting patiently for someone willing to gather them again. You are being offered, in the pages that follow, a single focused night and then another, and then a whole practice built night by night, in which old and unchosen programming may be gently identified, gently released, and new and deliberately chosen programming quietly and carefully installed in its place. Set aside now whatever doubt has followed you into this listening. Doubt is only the old programming defending itself, and it need not be argued with or defeated through force. It need only be noticed and set gently aside, the way one sets aside a heavy coat no longer needed for the warmth of the room one has entered. Enter this teaching with full and open attention, holding nothing back, for what is asked of you here is not years of your life, but only your sincerity, offered fully for the space of a single night. The teachings of Part 1 await you now. Let the reprogramming begin. Act 1. The Sleeping Mind Awakens. Chapter 1. The Night Everything Changes. Vernon Higgins was a tired accountant who had spent the better part of a decade adding figures by day in a cramped office that smelled faintly of ink and old paper, and lying restlessly awake by night in a narrow bed that never quite seemed to hold the warmth he needed. Each evening followed much the same pattern as the one before it, the same worn worries circling through his mind like a horse walking a familiar track around a small paddock, never straying from the path, never arriving anywhere new. He worried about the numbers that never quite balanced, about the promotion that never quite arrived, about the small disappointments of a life that felt, to him, permanently and unalterably modest. One particular evening, unable to sleep and too weary even to worry with his usual diligence, Vernon found himself, almost by accident, picturing not his customary tangle of concerns, but the calm and capable man he sometimes wished he could become, a man steady in his bearing, unhurried in his speech, entirely at ease in circumstances that would once have troubled him deeply. He held this picture loosely at first, without much conviction, simply because it was easier and gentler than his usual fretting, a kind of accidental rest from the exhausting labor of worry. He did not expect anything to come of it. He simply drifted eventually into sleep while holding this softer, kinder image of himself. He woke the next morning strangely lighter, as though something small and unnamed had shifted quietly within him overnight, though he could not have said precisely what had changed or why. His shoulders felt less burdened. His first thought upon waking was not, as it usually was, a worry about the day ahead, but something closer to simple readiness. A single night, approached with the right quality of attention, is enough to begin reprogramming the subconscious mind in earnest. It is not the passage of years that determines whether lasting change takes root within the deeper self, but the depth and sincerity of the receptive state in which a new impression is offered to it. A single night, held with genuine feeling, can accomplish what a decade of scattered and half-hearted effort never manages to achieve, for the deeper mind does not count days, it only registers depth. Not far from Vernon, in a modest house at the edge of the very same town, a woman named Loretta Pinkham spent countless nights fretting over the very same worn worries she had carried for years, the same unpaid bill turned over again and again in her mind, the same unkind remark from a sister-in-law replayed with fresh irritation each night, the same old disappointment, worried smooth like a stone turned over so many times by anxious fingers that its original shape had long since been forgotten. She never once suspected that these very nights, spent so faithfully and so thoroughly in worry, could instead have been used quite differently, that the same hours she gave so freely to rehearsing her troubles could have been given, just as freely, to rewriting them entirely. Consider your own nights, as they have been spent until this very evening, how many of them passed in idle worry, in aimless replaying of old grievances, never once used deliberately for anything beyond the exhausting repetition of what already troubled you. Consider, gently and without any harshness toward yourself, what might change in your life if even one of these nights, beginning with this very one, were used differently, were offered instead as a gift to the deeper self, rather than surrendered again to old and familiar worry. Practice. Before sleep tonight, choose one single quality you wish to reprogram into yourself. Calm, confidence, ease, generosity, courage, or any quality that calls to you clearly and sincerely in this moment. Hold it gently in mind as you drift towards sleep, resisting the urge to elaborate or to prove it to yourself with argument. Simply hold the feeling of it, softly, and let this one night be the true and quiet beginning of your reprogramming. Chapter 2. The Mind beneath the mind. Harlan Bixby, a clockmaker of considerable and well-regarded skill, had spent his whole working life assuming, as most people do without ever pausing to examine the assumption, that his conscious thoughts governed his life entirely, that whatever he decided plainly and deliberately in his waking hours, seated at his workbench with his tools laid out before him, was the whole and complete cause of what shaped his circumstances. He believed, as so many believe, that a man is simply the sum of his conscious decisions, weighed and chosen in the clear light of reason. He never once suspected that, beneath his careful daytime reasoning, some deeper and older mechanism ticked quietly and continuously, keeping its own separate time, following its own separate instructions, largely unexamined and entirely unsupervised by his conscious will, much like the intricate inner workings of one of his own clocks, continued their steady motion long after the polished face and hands had been fitted and the clock hung upon a wall, admired for its outward appearance by those who never thought to open the case and examine what truly drove its movement. Beneath the conscious mind lies a deeper mind, the true keeper of habit and circumstance, the quiet architect of far more of daily experience than most are ever taught to recognize. This deeper mind accepts new instruction most readily, not in the busy and argumentative hours of daylight reasoning, but in the hours surrounding sleep, when the conscious mind's usual vigilance has begun to loosen its customary grip. This deeper mind does not argue, does not reason, does not weigh evidence the way the conscious mind so proudly does. It simply accepts, faithfully and without complaint, whatever is offered to it with sufficient feeling and sufficient repetition, exactly as a field accepts whatever seed is scattered upon it, without preference for the wheat over the weed. Adelia Fenstermacher struggled for years, through gritted teeth and countless renewed resolutions, against a habit she could not seem to break through willpower alone, no matter how firmly she resolved each morning. Standing before her mirror, with real determination in her eyes, to be entirely rid of it by evening. Each night she would find herself, once again, exactly where she had been the night before, scolding herself bitterly for failing yet again, never once realizing that willpower, however genuinely strong, was simply never the correct tool for the task she had set herself. Willpower speaks the language of the conscious mind of argument, of resolution, of effort clearly applied. But habit is written in an older and deeper language altogether, one that does not respond to argument no matter how forcefully or how sincerely that argument is made. Consider gently which of your own struggles may belong not to the conscious will at all. However much you have blamed your own lack of discipline for their persistence, but to this deeper mind, quietly awaiting new and different instruction than any you have yet thought to offer it, in a language it can actually receive. Practice. Tonight, name one habit you have tried, unsuccessfully and perhaps repeatedly, to change through willpower alone. Consider approaching it differently this very evening, not through force or resolution, but through the gentler and more receptive instruction offered quietly in the hour before sleep, speaking to the deeper mind in the only language it has ever truly understood. Chapter 3. Why One Night is Enough. Delbert Cranshaw doubted, quite reasonably by his own careful accounting of the matter, that any real and lasting change could possibly come from a single night's effort, having been told throughout the whole of his life by every schoolteacher and every well-meaning relation who ever offered him advice, that transformation requires years of patient toil, that nothing truly worth having ever arrives quickly or easily, that easy gains are suspect gains. This belief had settled so deeply and so thoroughly into him over so many decades that he approached his first tentative attempt at nightly practice with considerably more skepticism than sincerity, expecting very little, and so, unsurprisingly, receiving very little in return for his half-hearted effort, It is not duration but depth of acceptance that truly determines whether an instruction takes root within the deeper mind and grows there into lasting circumstance. One single night, approached with full and genuine sincerity, can outweigh years of half-hearted and scattered effort entirely, for the deeper mind responds not to the slow accumulation of time, but to the quality and depth of feeling offered to it in any single receptive moment, however brief that moment may seem when measured against a calendar. Winifred Alcott, quite unlike Delbert in her approach, committed herself fully and without reservation to a single night's practice, holding nothing back, offering her chosen instruction with complete and undivided sincerity, the way one might offer a gift to someone they deeply respected, rather than a task to be grudgingly completed. She woke the following morning to find a subtle but genuinely unmistakable shift already taking hold in her outlook. Nothing dramatic that she could easily point to or describe convincingly to another, no sudden windfall or obvious transformation, but something real nonetheless, a quiet steadiness that had not been present in her the evening before. Release, if you are able, any lingering doubt that a single night could truly be enough to begin the work you seek to accomplish in your own life. Approach your own coming night, this very night now before you, with the same full sincerity that Winifred offered hers, rather than the cautious half measures that left Delbert so disappointed in his own early results. Practice. Set a clear and sincere intention now for exactly what this very night's practice will accomplish. Hold this intention simply, without excessive elaboration or anxious insistence, and offer it your complete and undivided attention as sleep draws near this evening. Chapter 4. The Programs You Never Chose. Otis Ravenscroft realized, with quiet and genuine surprise, one otherwise entirely unremarkable evening while reviewing his household accounts, that many of his deepest beliefs about money and about his own personal worth had never truly been chosen by him at all, not in any deliberate or conscious sense. They had arrived whole and already formed, inherited from childhood conversations he barely remembered clearly, absorbed silently and completely long before he was old enough to question anything told to him by the adults he trusted so completely and so unquestioningly in those early years. Most of the subconscious programming that quietly governs so much of daily adult life was installed entirely without conscious consent, absorbed in the earliest years of life from parents, from teachers, from the general atmosphere and unspoken assumptions of one's upbringing, long before the capacity for critical examination had even begun to develop. Recognizing this simple but often overlooked fact is the necessary first step toward replacing such inherited programming deliberately and consciously, rather than continuing to live, unknowingly and unquestioningly, by instructions one never truly agreed to in the first place. Clementine Ruggles traced a lifelong fear of failure, one that had shaped countless important decisions across the whole of her adult life, back to a single offhand and thoughtless remark made by a schoolteacher decades before a careless comment, likely forgotten by the teacher herself within the very same hour it was spoken, that had nonetheless taken quiet root in young Clementine's impressionable mind and grown, over the following decades, into a fear that colored nearly every risk she ever considered taking, and every opportunity she ever quietly declined. She marveled, once she finally traced this fear back to its true and surprisingly small origin, that so tiny and forgotten a seed could have grown into something so large and so persistently limiting within her. Consider which of your own beliefs, held so long you may have entirely forgotten they were ever separate from simple fact, may never have been truly chosen by you at all, but simply absorbed. The way Otis absorbed his beliefs about money and Clementine absorbed her fear of failure, long before either of them had any real say in the matter. Practice. Tonight, identify one inherited belief you are ready At last, to release. Name it plainly and honestly to yourself, without shame for having carried it so long, and let it go gently before you allow sleep to take you this evening. Chapter 5. The Silence Where Change Begins. Ambrose Tillotson, a printer by trade who spent his days amid the clatter and bustle of his busy print shop, discovered over many quiet years of careful observation that his most useful ideas never arrived amid that familiar noise and activity, however productive his days otherwise felt, but always in the quiet stillness just before sleep each evening, when the day's demands had finally been allowed to settle and fade into the background of his tired mind. True reprogramming requires a genuine measure of inner silence, for the subconscious mind receives new instruction most clearly and most completely when the noise and clutter of the day has been permitted to settle fully, leaving behind a genuine stillness in which new impressions can be offered without the competing distraction of the day's leftover thoughts and unresolved concerns. Prudence Hatchett filled every quiet moment of her day and her evening with distraction and idle chatter, keeping a radio playing or a conversation going even in the last minutes before sleep, never once allowing herself the genuine silence in which change might otherwise have taken root within her. She wondered from time to time, with real and growing frustration, why her occasional efforts at improvement never seemed to hold or take lasting effect, never once suspecting that she had left no quiet space whatsoever in which they could possibly do so. Consider how much genuine silence you allow yourself before sleep each night, honestly and without any particular judgment of your own habits, and consider what might grow there, quietly and steadily, given the chance to do so, undisturbed by chatter and distraction. Practice. In the minutes before beginning tonight's practice, sit quietly for a few moments and allow the noise of your day to settle fully. Breathe slowly and deliberately, and let a genuine stillness gather around you before you offer your mind its new and chosen instruction. Chapter 6. The Gatekeeper of Sleep. Silas Prentice, a locksmith by trade who understood, better than most, the particular nature of locks and the careful gates they were designed to guard, came in time, through years of quiet reflection on his own nightly habits, to understand that the mind, too, possesses its own gates, and that the gradual approach of sleep is the natural and time-honored key that opens the particular gate leading down to the subconscious mind that lies beneath ordinary waking thought. As the body relaxes gradually toward sleep, the usual defenses of the conscious mind loosen their grip and their customary vigilance, granting an open gate through which new instruction may pass largely unopposed by the doubt, the argument, and the second-guessing that so thoroughly guard the mind during ordinary waking hours. This particular gate does not remain open for long each night, and it opens most fully and most completely to the one who approaches it calmly, rather than anxiously fighting against the very drowsiness that signals its opening. Henrietta Poole fought her own drowsiness each and every night, with worry and with anxious internal argument, resisting sleep itself as though it were some enemy to be overcome through sheer determination rather than a gentle doorway to be walked through with acceptance, and in doing so, entirely unknowingly, slammed shut the very gate she might otherwise have passed through so easily and so freely each evening. Notice how you typically approach this particular gate each night, whether it has been left open through calm and gentle acceptance or guarded shut through worry and resistance, as Henrietta's so consistently and so unfortunately was. Practice. As sleep approaches tonight, consciously and deliberately relax your body, beginning with your shoulders, moving to your jaw, and finally your hands, allowing the gate to open freely and naturally, and offer your chosen instruction gently as you feel yourself passing through it into the deeper receptive state beyond. Chapter 7. Repetition, the Language of the Subconscious. Cyrus Applewhite, a schoolmaster of long and considerable experience who had taught several generations of children in the very same small schoolroom, noticed across many years of careful and attentive teaching that a lesson repeated calmly and often, in the same simple words each time, was remembered by his students long after any single dramatic and impressive lecture, however memorable it seemed in the moment of its delivery, had been entirely forgotten within a matter of mere weeks. The subconscious mind learns not through single grand gestures, however sincere or however dramatically delivered, but through calm and patient repetition offered consistently and faithfully over time. A simple phrase, repeated with genuine and sincere feeling behind it, carries far more true reprogramming power than any single elaborate effort undertaken only once with great enthusiasm, and then quietly abandoned when that initial enthusiasm inevitably fades. Beulah Sims tried a new belief only once, with great initial enthusiasm and considerable conviction in that first attempt, then abandoned the practice entirely when it failed to appear immediately and obviously reflected in her outward daily circumstances, never once giving patient repetition the genuine chance to accomplish the quiet work that a single dramatic attempt, however sincere, simply never could achieve on its own. Consider the true and lasting value of gentle, patient repetition over dramatic, one-time effort, and consider honestly whether you have been expecting a single night's enthusiasm, however genuine, to accomplish what only sustained and calm repetition, offered faithfully night after night, can truly achieve over time. Practice. Choose one short phrase tonight, simple and clear, and repeat it gently several times as part of your evening practice, allowing its very simplicity and its patient repetition to carry far more true weight than any elaborate or complicated wording ever could. Chapter 8. The Old Self Fighting to Stay. Roscoe Dunleavy noticed a strange and unexpected resistance rising within him the very first night he attempted, with real sincerity, to reprogram a long-held and deeply familiar belief about himself, as though some old and stubbornly familiar part of him objected, quietly but quite firmly, to being replaced by anything new, however genuinely beneficial, that new belief might eventually prove to be for his life. The old familiar self will often resist new and unfamiliar programming at first, not out of any true malice or deliberate opposition, but simply out of long and deeply worn habit, the sheer habit of being exactly as it has always been for so very long. This resistance, however uncomfortable it may feel in the moment of its arising, is a natural and entirely temporary stage in the larger process of change, not any genuine sign that the work itself has failed, or that the sincere effort behind it has been wasted. Mercy Whitcomb mistook this same natural resistance, when it arose within her own early practice, as certain and undeniable proof that her efforts were entirely useless and would never bear any genuine fruit, and gave up her practice altogether before the old and familiar pattern had been given sufficient time to loosen its long-standing grip upon her. Expect, and gently accept without alarm, a measure of inner resistance as you begin this work in your own life, without ever mistaking that natural and passing resistance for genuine defeat, as Mercy so unfortunately and so prematurely did in her own case. Practice. Should any resistance arise during tonight's practice, meet it calmly and without struggle. Breathe slowly. Acknowledge its presence without alarm or argument, and continue gently onward with your chosen instruction regardless of its quiet protest. Chapter 9. The Command Before Sleep. Jedediah Marsh began closing each and every night with a single, clear, and calmly spoken command offered quietly to his own deeper mind, nothing elaborate or complicated, only a brief and sincere statement of exactly what he wished to become. He noticed, over the course of the weeks that followed this new habit, his ordinary days beginning to align with that quiet, nightly command in small but steady and genuinely unmistakable ways that accumulated gradually into real and lasting change. The final clear thought held just before sleep fully arrives acts as a genuine command to the subconscious mind, carrying unusual and disproportionate weight, precisely because no contradicting thought follows it before rest itself finally begins. Whatever is offered last, in this particular and precious sense, is offered most powerfully of all the thoughts held throughout an entire day. Arabella Stanhope, by clear contrast, allowed her own final waking thoughts each night to drift aimlessly between one worry and the next, giving her subconscious mind no clear or coherent command whatsoever to carry forward into the long hours of the night, and so her nights, however many of them passed in this aimless fashion, accomplished nothing in particular toward any genuine or lasting change. Consider what command, if any at all, you have been leaving with your own deeper mind each night before this one, and consider what a clear and deliberately chosen command might now accomplish in its place, going forward from this evening. Practice. Compose one clear, calm command tonight, and hold it as the very final thought before sleep fully takes you, allowing nothing else whatsoever to follow closely behind it in your mind. Chapter 10. The First Reprogramming. A young telegraph clerk named Elias Woodruff completed his very first deliberate night of conscious reprogramming and woke the following morning genuinely uncertain whether anything at all had truly changed within him, finding no immediate or dramatic evidence to confirm that his sincere effort had accomplished anything of real substance. Only some days later did he notice, quite by surprise and almost in passing, a subtle new steadiness present in himself that he could not entirely explain or account for, a quiet confidence that had simply not been present in him before that first deliberate night of practice. The first reprogramming often works quietly beneath the surface of ordinary conscious awareness for some time, before any outward and visible proof appears to confirm it clearly. This first deliberate night, however uncertain and however unconfirmed it may feel in the immediate moment following it, marks the true and genuine beginning of a life no longer shaped by unexamined habit and merely accidental circumstance, but by deliberate and conscious choice. A skeptical neighbor named Homer Castellan refused to attempt even a single night's practice himself, preferring instead the known and familiar certainty of his own old and long-established patterns, however genuinely unsatisfying those patterns had proven to be across many long years of his life, simply because they were known and comfortable in their very familiarity, however limiting that familiar comfort truly was. Recognize that you, too, now stand at this very same threshold that Elias once stood at himself, ready and prepared to complete your own first deliberate reprogramming this very evening. Practice. To close this first part of your journey, complete your first full reprogramming exercise tonight, combining your chosen command, calm and patient repetition of it, and a full and complete release into sleep, trusting the deeper work now quietly begun. Act 2. The Sacred Practices of the One Night, Chapter 11. The Hypnagogic Gate. Nathaniel Corcoran, a night baker who rose each evening while most of the town around him settled into sleep, to begin the long hours of his solitary work amid the warmth of his ovens and the quiet rhythm of his kneading, discovered, in the drowsy minutes before his own brief sleep began each morning after his shift ended, a peculiar and quite unusual clarity in which his thoughts felt unusually vivid and remarkably impressionable, far more so than at any other hour of his long working day or night. This drowsy borderland just before sleep, neither fully waking nor yet fully asleep, is the single most receptive gate the mind ever offers to the one seeking to reprogram it deliberately. Instructions given here within this narrow and admittedly fleeting window of heightened receptivity, sink deeper and take hold far more firmly than instructions offered at any other hour of the day, however sincere and however well-intentioned those other efforts might genuinely be. Dorcas Whitfield fell straight into deep and entirely dreamless sleep each and every night, without any pause whatsoever, dropping quickly and completely from full wakefulness directly into unconsciousness, and so, entirely unknowingly, missed this particular open and receptive gate altogether, night after night, throughout the whole of her life. Notice this same drowsy threshold in your own nights as they unfold, learning gradually and patiently to recognize it clearly, rather than simply sleeping through it entirely unaware, as Dorcas so consistently and so unknowingly did throughout her many years. Practice. Tonight, learn to recognize the gentle onset of this particular drowsy state as it begins to arrive, and hold your chosen instruction gently within it, allowing that instruction to sink deep before sleep fully, and finally takes you into its embrace. Chapter 12. Falling Asleep as the New Self. Barnabas Kettering, a modest tailor of otherwise unremarkable standing in his small town, began each night falling asleep, not as the anxious and uncertain man he had long been throughout his working life, but as the calm and capable man he sincerely and deeply intended to become, feeling that particular calm ease as though it were already his own true and settled nature, rather than merely a distant hope he wistfully wished for from a great distance. Assuming the fully felt identity of the new self while gently drifting into sleep instructs the subconscious mind more powerfully than perhaps any other single practice offered in this entire book, for the deeper mind accepts the assumed identity as simple and settled fact, and begins, quietly and faithfully, and without further argument, arranging outward circumstance to match precisely what it has been given to work with. Prunella Ashcombe, by clear and telling contrast, rehearsed her own old anxious self each and every night purely out of long-standing habit, falling asleep exactly as she had fallen asleep for so many years previously, and continued, morning after unchanging morning, to wake and find that very same anxious self still firmly and quite unmistakably in place within her, entirely unchanged by any conscious effort she might occasionally make during her waking hours. Consider carefully which self you have been falling asleep as each and every night of your life until this one, and whether that particular self truly and honestly matches who you sincerely wish, in your heart, to become. Practice. Tonight, fall asleep consciously feeling the ease and settled identity of your new reprogrammed self, holding that particular feeling gently as your very last waking sensation before sleep arrives. Chapter 13. The Nightly Script. Augustus Winfield found that writing out, in advance and in a few simple and carefully chosen sentences, exactly the new belief he wished to carry with him into sleep each night, steadied his mind considerably, removing entirely the hesitation and the aimless wandering thought that had troubled and undermined his earlier, unprepared and rather scattered attempts at this same practice. Preparing a brief and clear script of new belief before lying down each evening removes hesitation and aimless wandering thought from the practice entirely, allowing the reprogramming itself to proceed with calm and genuinely settled precision, rather than the fumbling and uncertain improvisation that so often undermines sincere effort in the very moment it matters most. Temperance Dowd attempted her own nightly practice each evening entirely, without any advance preparation whatsoever, fumbling repeatedly for the right words even as sleep had already begun quietly to take her, and found her efforts correspondingly uncertain, and rather inconsistent as a result, lacking entirely the steadiness that only a little quiet forethought might so easily have provided her. Consider the genuine value of a little quiet preparation before the receptive hour arrives each evening, rather than trusting entirely to whatever words might occur to you in that fleeting moment, as Temperance so often and so unsuccessfully did. Practice. Write a brief nightly script tonight, 2 or 3 simple and clear sentences to read over or recall quietly just before beginning your evening practice, steadying your mind well before the receptive hour has fully arrived. Chapter 14. The Power of a Single Sentence. Millard Gooch reduced years of scattered, vague, and rather unfocused hopes into a single short sentence, spoken nightly with quiet and genuine conviction, and found this newfound simplicity considerably more effective in practice than any of his earlier, more elaborate and complicated attempts at affirmation had ever proven to be across many years of trying. A single sentence, spoken with sincere and genuine feeling behind it, often carries far more true reprogramming power than a lengthy and needlessly complicated affirmation ever could, for the deeper subconscious mind consistently favors clarity above complexity, and a single, clear instruction above a dozen scattered and rather uncertain ones offered, without any real conviction behind them. Josephine Radcliffe's own lengthy nightly affirmations grew, gradually and almost without her noticing, so complicated and so needlessly elaborate over time, that she eventually lost the genuine thread of feeling behind them entirely, reciting words she no longer truly felt with any sincerity, offering length and needless complexity, precisely where simplicity and heartfelt sincerity were what had truly been required all along. Consider simplifying your own nightly practice down to its single, clearest, and most essential sentence, trusting fully that genuine simplicity, rather than needless elaboration, is very often the truer and more effective path forward. Practice. Distill your own chosen belief tonight into one single, clear sentence, and repeat it with genuine and sincere feeling as the central part of your practice this evening. Chapter 15. Erasing the Old Recording. Cornelius Ashby imagined quite vividly, and with considerable deliberate mental effort, an old and rather worn recording playing his own familiar fears back to him on some private inner instrument, and pictured himself calmly and deliberately reaching out to switch it off entirely, before playing a fresh new recording in its place, one that spoke instead of genuine ease and settled confidence. Visualizing the deliberate release of an old and unwanted mental pattern before attempting to install the new pattern meant to replace it can ease the whole transition considerably and reduce significantly the resistance so often met along the way by those who attempt to install new belief directly over old, entirely unreleased patterns still lingering stubbornly beneath the surface. Ophelia Trench tried repeatedly to install new and hopeful beliefs directly over her own old and fearful ones, without ever consciously and deliberately releasing what had come before, and found the two competing patterns struggling uneasily within her, neither one able to fully and completely take hold, while the other remained, entirely unaddressed, occupying the very same inner space within her. Consider consciously and deliberately releasing an old pattern before attempting to install its intended replacement tonight, rather than simply layering the new belief carelessly atop the old and unexamined one, exactly as Ophelia so unsuccessfully attempted to do in her own practice. Practice. Tonight, briefly visualize the deliberate release of one old mental recording picture, it fading gently away, or simply switching off entirely before installing tonight's fresh new recording clearly in its place. Chapter 16. The Dream as Confirmation. Wilhelmina Stroud kept a small notebook beside her bed each night, and began, gradually over the weeks of her sincere practice, to notice her own dreams shifting steadily in their general tone, growing calmer and considerably more hopeful than they had reliably been before she first began her careful nightly work. Dreams often reflect, gently and without any particular insistence, whether the reprogramming currently underway is beginning to take genuine and lasting hold offering the attentive and observant dreamer quiet confirmation of the deeper work already in steady progress, work that may not yet have fully shown itself in outward waking circumstance. Barnaby Elstree dismissed his own steadily shifting dreams as entirely meaningless, mere nighttime nonsense, unworthy of any real or serious attention, never once considering carefully what quiet progress they might actually have been confirming to him all along, had he only thought to look more closely and more attentively at what they were gently showing him. Consider your own recent dreams as possible gentle confirmations of your ongoing practice, rather than mere meaningless accidents of an idle, sleeping mind, as Barnaby so quickly and so dismissively assumed his own dreams to be. Practice. Tomorrow morning, briefly note whatever fragment of your dreams you are able to recall, entirely without judgment, simply observing whatever quiet confirmation may be gradually beginning to appear within them. Chapter 17. The One-Night Ritual. Ezekiel Thistlewood assembled his own brief and deeply personal nightly ritual from several of the smaller individual practices he had gradually learned, and found over time and with growing conviction that the sheer consistency of the ritual itself became every bit as powerful in its effect as any single element contained within it. A short and genuinely consistent ritual, practiced with real sincerity night after faithful night, transforms what would otherwise remain scattered and inconsistent nightly effort into a deliberate and reliably repeatable act of true reprogramming, far more effective over time than any single practice attempted, only occasionally and in isolation from the others. Henrietta Coswell changed her own approach every single night, trying something entirely new each time, rather than settling into any consistent ritual of her own devising, and found her progress correspondingly inconsistent and rather unpredictable as a direct result, never quite managing to build steadily upon whatever small progress had come before. Consider assembling your own brief, repeatable nightly ritual from what you have already learned throughout these teachings, rather than continuing to approach each new night as though beginning entirely afresh and from nothing. Practice. Assemble a short, personal, nightly ritual tonight from the various practices you have already learned, and resolve firmly to repeat it faithfully each and every night going forward from this one. Chapter 18. Visualizing the New Program. Percival Hawthorne pictured, in vivid and really quite considerable detail, precisely how his ordinary days would come to unfold once his new and carefully chosen belief had fully taken root within him. Watching the small and specific scenes of his changed and improved life play out gently before his mind's eye in the quiet moments before sleep each evening, vivid and genuinely detailed visualization of the new program already fully in action, held with real and sincere feeling rather than mere effortful mental strain, strengthens its installation into the deeper subconscious mind, far beyond anything words alone could ever hope to accomplish on their own merit. Araminta Fenwick's own visualizations remained vague and only ever half-formed throughout her practice, offering general impressions rather than specific and vivid scenes, and she found her eventual results just as uncertain and half-formed as the faint and indistinct images she had been offering her own mind each night. Consider honestly whether your own inner pictures of the new self are vivid and specific, rich with genuine sensory detail, or faint and merely general, as Araminta's so often and so unfortunately were throughout her own attempts. Practice. Tonight, briefly visualize one specific scene reflecting your new, reprogrammed belief clearly in action, filling it with as much genuine sensory detail, sight, sound, feeling as you are able to summon. Chapter 19. Gratitude as the Final Command. Beatrice Longstreet closed each night's careful practice with a quiet word of genuine thanks for the change already quietly underway within her, though no outward or visible proof of that change had yet appeared in her waking circumstances to confirm it clearly to her. Gratitude offered in advance of any outward proof acts as a final and powerfully confirming command to the subconscious mind, affirming clearly that the new program has already been fully accepted and is already, quietly and steadily, taking hold within the deeper mind that governs so very much of daily waking experience. Reginald Applegate completed his own nightly practice faithfully each and every evening, but consistently withheld any genuine gratitude until results finally appeared to justify it in his own mind, entirely unknowingly weakening, through this very withholding, the confirming command he had only just offered himself moments before in his practice. Consider closing your own nightly practice with quiet and genuine gratitude, rather than anxious and expectant waiting for proof that has not yet arrived, exactly as Reginald so often and so unfortunately did throughout his own practice. Practice. Close tonight's practice with a brief moment of quiet and sincere gratitude for the change already underway within you, spoken gently as though it were already, quite simply, true. Chapter 20. Waking into the New Code. Clara Pennywhistle noticed, over time and with growing attentiveness, that the particular way she greeted her very first waking thought each morning seemed either to reinforce clearly or to quietly and gradually unravel the careful work her nightly practice had so patiently accomplished the evening before. The moments just after waking remain highly impressionable, very nearly as receptive as the moments before sleep itself, and greeting them deliberately with the same new belief carried faithfully into sleep the night before helps seal the reprogramming firmly and lastingly into the waking day that follows immediately after. Wendell Ashgrove woke each and every morning, already rehearsing his old and deeply familiar worries before his feet had even fully touched the floor beside his bed, quietly and entirely undoing, in a matter of mere moments, the careful and patient work his nightly practice had labored so faithfully to build the evening before. Consider carefully how you typically greet your own first waking moments each day, and whether they genuinely reinforce or quietly undo the careful work of the night before, exactly as Wendell's own habitual waking thoughts so often and so unfortunately did throughout his life. Practice. To close this second part of your journey, greet your first waking moment tomorrow morning with the very same new belief you carried faithfully through the night, before any other competing thought is permitted to intrude upon that quiet and deliberate moment. Act 3. Living as the Reprogrammed Self. Chapter 21. The Morning Signal. Horatio Pemberley began noticing small and rather unexpected shifts in his ordinary daily circumstances shortly after his very first nights of deliberate and sincere practice, though he very nearly dismissed each and every one of them as simple and ordinary coincidence, unworthy of any particular notice or lasting significance in his mind. The earliest signs of successful reprogramming often arrive as small and rather easily overlooked occurrences in the ordinary course of daily life, and learning to recognize them clearly for what they truly are strengthens considerably the reader's growing confidence in the deeper work already quietly underway within them, work that has not yet fully revealed itself. Priscilla Marchmont noticed quite similar small signs arising steadily in her own life around this very same time in her practice, but waved each and every one of them away as entirely insignificant, and so failed altogether to nourish the very confidence that would otherwise have carried her much further along her own promising and encouraging path. Consider the small signals that may already be quietly appearing in your own life since you first began this practice, signals you may perhaps have been too quick to dismiss entirely, exactly as Priscilla so unfortunately dismissed her own. Practice. Tonight, note down one small signal of change you have genuinely noticed since first beginning your nightly practice, however minor or seemingly insignificant it may at first appear to you in the moment. Chapter 22. Becoming the Reprogrammed Self. Leopold Farnsworth stopped asking, quite deliberately, when his outward circumstances would finally and visibly change, and began instead, quietly and in small daily ways throughout his ordinary life, simply living as the person his new inner program had already come to describe, adjusting his small daily choices carefully to match the identity he had been so patiently cultivating each night in his practice. Lasting change is confirmed not merely in the quiet hours of sleep, however important that nightly work genuinely is, but equally in the small daily choices that reflect the new identity being steadily cultivated, gradually anchoring the nightly reprogramming firmly and lastingly into ordinary waking life, where it can finally take full and lasting root. Cordelia Winship practiced her own nightly ritual faithfully and without any fail whatsoever, and yet continued to act entirely as her own old self throughout each and every waking day that followed, and found her overall progress, as a direct result of this inconsistency, curiously and rather frustratingly slow compared to what her genuine nightly sincerity alone might otherwise have suggested it should be. Consider one small daily choice that might genuinely reflect your own new, reprogrammed self, rather than relying on nightly practice alone to accomplish the entire and complete work required for lasting change. Practice. Choose one small daily action to take tomorrow as your reprogrammed self, however modest or seemingly small that particular action may appear to you in this moment. Chapter 23. When the Old Program Reboots. Ignatius Colby, well along in his own sincere practice, and genuinely encouraged by real and steady progress across many previous weeks, was startled quite badly, one particularly difficult week, to find his old anxious pattern rising up again within him as strongly and as convincingly as it had ever done before his practice had even begun. Even genuinely successful reprogramming may occasionally see the old pattern briefly reboot under sufficient stress or unexpected difficulty, and this is not any true failure, however much it may certainly resemble failure in the discouraged and disheartened moment of its sudden arrival, but rather a natural and entirely passing occurrence, to be met calmly and patiently, rather than with genuine fear or alarm. Beulah Thistleton mistook this very same reboot, when it arose unexpectedly within her own otherwise successful practice, as certain and undeniable proof that all her sincere effort had entirely failed, and abandoned her practice altogether in genuine and quite understandable discouragement at that particular moment. Recognize a temporary reboot of the old pattern, should it ever arise within your own ongoing practice, as something entirely ordinary and expected, rather than as any genuine defeat, exactly as Beulah so unfortunately and so prematurely mistook hers to be. Practice. On nights when the old and familiar pattern briefly resurfaces within you, return gently and calmly to your new chosen command, without alarm, trusting fully in the deeper work already quietly underway within you. Chapter 24. The Patience of Deep Change. An old vintner named Solomon Whitlock understood clearly, from a long lifetime spent carefully among his casks and his cool stone cellars, that a truly fine wine simply cannot be hurried toward its full and proper maturity, however genuinely eager and however increasingly impatient the waiting customer might become while anticipating its eventual completion. Deep and lasting reprogramming, much like a truly fine wine resting patiently in its cask, unfolds entirely in its own unhurried and quite natural season, and true mastery of this particular practice requires genuine patience with that natural timing, rather than demanding instant results that the deeper mind was simply never designed to provide immediately upon command. Young Marigold Ash abandoned her own sincere practice after only a very few nights of genuine effort, expecting an immediate and dramatic transformation that had simply not been given adequate time to properly develop within her, and so interrupted entirely a quiet process that had, in genuine truth, only just begun its own patient and unhurried work. Consider your own patience with this particular practice, honestly and without harsh self-judgment, and consider whether you have perhaps expected results before their proper and natural season has had any real or fair chance to arrive. Practice. Tonight, offer yourself a quiet reminder affirming genuine patience with the unseen and natural timing of your own deep and continuing change. Chapter 25. Old Fears Resurfacing. Nathaniel Grimsby was quite unsettled, one particularly restless night, to find an old fear he had genuinely believed, long since resolved, rising up again within him with entirely unexpected and rather unwelcome force, as though no real progress at all had ever truly been made throughout his many months of sincere practice. The return of an old and seemingly resolved fear during ongoing reprogramming is not, in itself, any genuine sign of failure, however alarming it may certainly feel in the immediate moment of its sudden and unwelcome return, but simply an old and buried impression surfacing once more, quite naturally, to be gently released again, exactly as it was carefully released before. Cornelia Ashworth mistook this very same return of an old fear as certain proof that all her sincere efforts had been entirely wasted, and gave up her own practice altogether in real and quite understandable discouragement, precisely at the very moment when continued and patient practice would have carried her safely and completely through to the other side of that same difficulty. Recognize the return of an old fear, should it ever arise again within your own ongoing practice, as a genuine opportunity for further and deeper release, rather than as any final verdict of failure passed upon your entirely sincere efforts. Practice. On nights when an old fear unexpectedly resurfaces, gently guide yourself back to your chosen new command, meeting that fear calmly and patiently, rather than with any alarm or panic. Chapter 26. The Voices You Keep at Night. Josephine Kavanagh noticed, gradually, and with growing awareness, that the imagined arguments she so often rehearsed silently before sleep left her mood noticeably soured well into the following day, coloring conversations that had genuinely nothing at all to do with the imagined conflict she had privately and unnecessarily rehearsed the night before. The imagined voices and conversations carried so easily into sleep shape the emotional tone the subconscious mind readily accepts as real and true, and so these particular inner voices must be chosen with exactly the same careful attention given to any other part of this nightly practice, rather than left entirely to unconscious habit and idle rehearsal. Barnabas Reese nightly rehearsed old grievances with those who had genuinely wronged him at some point, replaying each remembered slight in vivid and rather unhelpful detail each evening, entirely unknowingly filling his own subconscious mind with conflict and lingering bitterness, rather than the genuine calm he claimed during his waking hours to sincerely seek for himself. Notice carefully what inner voices you have been carrying so readily into sleep each night, and whether these particular voices truly and genuinely serve the reprogramming you have sincerely set out to accomplish for yourself. Practice. Tonight, imagine one brief, calm, and genuinely encouraging voice to carry deliberately with you into sleep, choosing this particular inner company quite deliberately rather than leaving it entirely to unconscious chance. Chapter 27. Compounding the New Program. Frederick Langhorne noticed, as his own sincere nightly practice continued steadily across many patient months, that each night's quiet progress seemed to build gently and steadily upon whatever had come immediately before it, so that the overall pace of his change appeared genuinely to accelerate over time, rather than merely accumulating in a simple and steady straight line. Consistent, nightly reprogramming compounds quite naturally over time, with each night's quiet work reinforcing faithfully whatever came before it, so that the overall pace of genuine change quietly quickens the longer the sincere practice itself continues, without any significant interruption along the way. Agatha Winslow practiced her own version of this only occasionally, and rather inconsistently, taking up her nightly ritual enthusiastically for a few days before setting it aside entirely for weeks at a stretch, and so found each renewed attempt starting again nearly from the very beginning each time, rather than building steadily upon whatever genuine progress had quietly come before it. Consider the true and lasting value of consistency in allowing your own progress to compound steadily over time, rather than starting over again and again from nothing, exactly as Agatha so often and so unfortunately found herself doing throughout her own inconsistent practice. Practice. Tonight, briefly reflect on your own consistency thus far in this practice, and renew quietly your own sincere commitment to your ongoing nightly work going forward from this evening. Chapter 28. Those Who Reprogrammed Before You. An old harbor pilot named Ezra Thornbury possessed a calm and genuinely unshakable confidence that others working along the busy docks quietly attributed, among themselves, to some private nightly habit he rarely, if ever, spoke of openly, and never fully explained to anyone who happened to ask him directly about the true source of his remarkable and steady composure. Quiet and largely unremarked figures throughout the whole of recorded history have shaped their own remarkable personal transformation through some version of this very same forgotten practice, leaving behind only faint traces in old letters and in family memory for those willing to look closely enough and patiently enough to recognize them clearly for what they truly represent. A young descendant named Charlotte Thornbury discovered her own ancestor's old and forgotten journal many years after his eventual passing, and recognized, with genuine and quiet astonishment, the very same practices she had only just recently learned herself, recorded there faithfully in his own careful handwriting many decades before her own birth into the world. Consider what quiet and perhaps unrecognized habits of mind may exist, waiting patiently, somewhere within your own family's history, waiting to be noticed at last in this new and clearer light you now possess. Practice. Reflect briefly this very evening on one such quiet transformation from your own life or family lineage, considering it now for the first time, with this fresh and deeper understanding you have gained. Chapter 29. Passing on the Code. Clementine Marsh gently and freely shared her own sincere nightly practice with a struggling friend who had confided her own genuine difficulties to her, offering this knowledge freely, and without any insistence whatsoever, that her friend believe a single word of what she was sharing, and found her own conviction and her own results deepening quite considerably as she did so. Sharing this particular practice with others, freely and entirely without insistence upon their belief, strengthens the giver's own possession of the knowledge quite considerably, for what is taught with genuine sincerity becomes, through the very act of teaching, more firmly and more deeply rooted within the teacher than it ever fully was before the teaching itself first began. Ambrose Fenwick kept his own newfound practice entirely and jealously to himself, sharing it with absolutely no one around him, and found his own progress growing strangely and rather inexplicably stagnant as a direct result of this withholding, as though the very act of keeping the knowledge to himself had quietly closed some important door within his own practice. Consider whether there might be someone in your own life you could quietly share this practice with, offering it as freely and as generously as Clementine offered hers to her own struggling friend. Practice. Identify one person with whom you might gently share a single teaching from this book, expressed simply and sincerely in your own words and in your own time. Chapter 30. The Mind That Reprograms Itself. An aged Rutherford Blake found, across the whole span of a long and faithfully lived life, that his own mind now seemed to correct and renew itself each and every night entirely, without any conscious effort whatsoever on his part, the practice itself having become, over so many patient years, as entirely natural to him as the simple act of breathing. Once this particular practice is truly learned, and genuinely lived across enough patient years of sincere effort, it becomes the natural and settled rhythm of an aligned mind, continuing thereafter of its own accord to refine and to renew itself night after faithful night, long after any deliberate, conscious effort has faded gently into simple and effortless habit. A young seeker named Wilhelmina Foss visited old Rutherford one quiet afternoon and asked him plainly and directly the true secret of his remarkable and quiet ease, only to be told, simply and without elaboration, that his own mind had learned, long ago in his life, precisely how to tend to itself without any further instruction required from him. Imagine your own future self, years from this very evening, for whom this entire practice requires no more conscious effort than the simple and natural act of closing your eyes each night. Practice. To close this third and final part of your journey, envision your own mind, years from now, continuing quietly and faithfully to renew itself with each night's rest, exactly as Rutherford's own mind had learned to do. Epilogue. You now carry knowledge once known only to a rare few that a single night, rightly and sincerely used, holds within it the quiet power to reprogram even the deepest and most stubborn patterns of the mind. What once seemed to require years of relentless and exhausting struggle has revealed itself, gradually across these teachings, as something far more immediate and far more genuinely within your own reach than you were ever taught to believe possible by those who came before you. Consider for a quiet moment the distance already traveled from that first uncertain night in which you were genuinely unsure whether any of this could truly work at all, to this final and settled understanding you now hold quietly and confidently within you. Your own subconscious mind has already begun its own quiet work, faithfully and without complaint, whether or not outward and visible proof has yet fully appeared before your waking eyes to confirm it. Sleep is no longer merely rest, as you were once taught to believe throughout your earlier life. It is, instead, a nightly doorway, and you now know, surely and quietly, exactly how to walk through it, carrying you steadily, night after faithful night, toward the mind, and toward the life you have quietly and deliberately chosen to become.